and Fernando, thank you for making it to Wellesley and joining us on stage. Exciting to talk about scaling businesses, both from the point of view of the founder and the investor. And I'm going to actually let both of you do your own introductions. I think it's helpful to hear kind of a little bit about your career in your own words. And so would love to hear your most recent titles and companies, and a little bit more context on what scaling has meant for you, both in terms of team size or kind of revenue, or kind of however you have thought about scaling, just so as the conversation goes on, the audience has a sense of what scale has meant for you in your career.
Sure. Yeah, so you want me to start? Sure. I'm Dan Edmonson. Was in the 2-year program here, graduated in 2015. I started a drone service company called Dronegenuity. It's basically a 2-sided network that I bootstrapped and as a solopreneur. Started that back in 2016. And yeah, it's actually interesting. So when Gonzalo invited me to join, I was like, okay, I don't know, we're still in the process. We're constantly growing and still trying to break through to higher heights. But I did think that some of my perspective could be valuable, which is why I accepted the invitation as someone who started a company from scratch and, grown it at least successfully up until now. It's come a long way. I mean, I guess where to go with the scaling piece of it. It's comes with a lot of challenges, and it'll be different depending on what type of business you're starting. This is a services business, so professional services business, so it's a little bit more challenging than others could potentially be in terms of scaling. But yeah, we've grown. I'm able to come here on a Friday afternoon. I'm able to play catch with my sons after school, which is nice too. So yeah, I mean, if there's a specific question with regards to scaling, I'd be happy to answer.
I guess maybe for context, like about how big is your team?
Right. So what's interesting is as our revenue has grown and our earnings have grown, the team has actually gotten smaller over the past several years. So we've learned to become a little bit more efficient, maybe not need as many people. Right now, we have about 10 internationally between the US and the Philippines. But that's kind of where we are.
That's super helpful.
Yes, hi, Fernando D'Alessio. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I graduated undergraduate like about 30 years ago, and I went the traditional route. I went to investment banking. I did 10 years of M&A in Latin America, London, and New York, and then 2 years of corporate development. And I've been doing startups for the last 13 years. I wouldn't change it for the world. I wish I had started 30 years ago. So my first startup, we tried to replicate the Amazon business model in Latin America called Linio, when Amazon was not in Latin America. So that was like 13 years ago, 2012. We were in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Argentina. And we grew very fast, both in terms of revenues, headcount, and we basically adapted a business model that was very difficult. And I had already lived in New York for about 10 years, and I never understood why Amazon and all the big players hadn't been in Latin America. Well, logistics doesn't work. Nobody does it. Payments, it's a cash-based economy, so nobody pays with credit cards or debit cards. You need to pay and collect cash in the door when you're delivering the product. So it was very interesting. There's a lot of fraud, no trust in the system. And so it was incredible. I grew it for the first 3 years. I left, and a couple of years later, we sold it to a big retail conglomerate. And when I left to launch Juntos, which is basically, think of Simon Malls, shopping mall, but digitally. Like, we didn't sell products. We basically built a platform and just onboarded about 1,000 brands and retailers, and we're a technology partner. Scaling was very different between both experiences. The first, my immediate team was about 400 people. In Juntos, we were 40. So kind of to your point, we became a lot more efficient. Instead of us investing in digital marketing, we asked the brands to invest in digital marketing for us because we were just opening a digital store within our platform. And exactly 3 years ago, we sold. So went through the whole cycle. The first experience was very different because I was part of a venture studio. So I was involved 100% in growing the business exponentially, which is basically what scaling is. The second one, was involved in everything, building the platform, raising capital, and we try to grow as fast as possible regionally. But capital scarce in the region, so eventually we decided just to sell it. Now I'm involved in two projects. One is a software factory based in New York City, and the other one, which is basically in the phase of incorporation, is we're launching a real estate marketplace. So one of the things is like the adrenaline of just building platforms or companies or startups from scratch 0 to 1 is just amazing. And you've done Babson, which is one of the leading schools, if not the leading schools in terms of entrepreneurship. So don't hesitate. If you feel like you want to do it, just give it a try.
Awesome. Well, really great experiences and excited to hear a little bit more of your perspectives on some of the questions we're going to go through, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But would love to start it off. And I think to both of your points, it also, a lot of things depend on your funding mechanism and how you think about the future of your business. But curious how both of you have thought about determining when a business is ready to scale. And perhaps that means that first outside hire, that first round of funding, kind of whatever that has meant for you, kind of what was that kind of impetus moment for the different businesses that you've been in? And we can go in the same order.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, that's a really good question. So as someone who was bootstrapping the company, it actually took a little while. And when you finally go from one person to two, you're basically doubling headcount 100%. And then each additional hire after that is a significant percentage increase. So you have to make sure there's enough work there where you can afford it. I mean, again, it's an advantage and a disadvantage to bootstrapping is you have to run a tight ship and you have to do it when the time is right. So I finally got to a point where there were a lot of attractive opportunities out there that I wasn't able to pursue. Just logistically, just not possible. I mean, I was, I've sort of morbidly joked about it in the past, but those first 2 years when I started the company, it was like I probably took a couple of years off my life as a trade because it was just nonstop. Weekends, early mornings, and I mean early mornings, 3 a.m. getting up to get started. But it was eventually when I couldn't take anymore, and there were opportunities right there within my grasp where I could take the next step and bring someone else on. What I do think is interesting, though, is, I think so many people come up through maybe grew up watching Shark Tank or some of these other shows where everything's about raising capital and getting investment, and they think of that as the first step, and maybe it is depending on the company. But had I gone that way and raised money initially, I would have probably spent it poorly because I didn't really know yet. I learned a lot over the course of time, like things that I tried. Okay, maybe that was the wrong direction. Maybe I should tinker with it and try it this way or that way. But if I had a bunch of capital at the outset, I probably would have plowed more of it into certain processes that maybe weren't perfect, and they were honed over time. So, I think that's something to consider as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate to have done 3 venture-backed startups. One that is also like bootstrap. I didn't raise $1. And the fourth, I already have a pre-seed round of just over $1 million. And it's a PowerPoint. It's not even like, we haven't even written one line of code. And it's very different. The first one, we raised 230 million to scale regionally in Latin America. The second, we raised 7 million, but we were 1,000 times more efficient with 10% of the headcount. We knew exactly what our unit economics should be from day one. We didn't overspend. And I think, unfortunately, most of the media and outlets, we praise and reward the people that raise a lot of money. That's not an achievement. In fact, if you're raising too much money, sometimes I even question whether good enough, because if you can grow without money, that's when you really prove your skill. So the team needs to grow as the company grows, and you need to be very careful. I personally treat money, even if it's not mine, as it was 100% mine. And I think that's the biggest misalignment. VCs are pouring a lot of money. Most founders are not very disciplined, and they're like, "Oh, hey, I have $1 billion. Let's just spend it all. Let's hire the best people. Let's grow exponentially." And part of the worst scale needs to be linked to product market. So it doesn't make sense just scaling because you have the money. You need to make sure that there's a need for your product. There's the stickiness that it's been mentioned several times. And the most important, I think, in the panel of the pitches, the biggest KPIs that one would need to focus both as an entrepreneur but as an investor is you need to grow with the lowest customer acquisition cost, your CAC, and the highest customer lifetime value. And the customer lifetime value depends on two variables. One is the repurchase rate or recurrency, which is basically how long the customer stays with you, and your margins. So, and it's a ratio, like customer lifetime value divided by CAC. That's the only number that I will look in a business and see, all right, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. And it needs to improve over time. It's not like a static number. So as a founder, it's important that you think of that, especially if you want to be venture backed. Because you need to think like, all right, if I was on the other side of the table, what would I look for? And of course, it's team. But then, okay, do you have a large market, addressable market, TAM? Do you have a good business economic that you can monetize? Is it sticky, your product? And so forth. But at the end of the day, scalability is linked to everything that we've spoken so far.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, when I'm working with pre-seed and seed teams outside of school at the venture fund I work at, we often also talk about like quality of your data.
Yeah.
And so the point is like, there's a really big difference between 1,000 people that have maybe tried a free trial and 10 people who use it every day and give you feedback, and that loop you're getting. So I think that's a great point. I think a thread we can pull on here is that those early hires, be it when you're doubling headcount from 1 to 2, or when you're going from 25 to 50, and you now are no longer just hiring from your network, but you're truly having to kind of turn on that recruiting mechanism. Would be curious some of the best advice you would have for founders in the room that are looking to do that, or people in the room who are thinking like, oh, I think I might want to be an early hire somewhere. Like, what are some of those traits that you saw to give you conviction that those were the right people to hire? We'll go in the same
Yeah.
order.
So given the type of business I started, it was actually, I was looking for entrepreneurial capabilities. So when you have a small company, and why it's hard to scale the headcount is one, you're doing a little bit of everything. Everyone has to do a little bit of everything. And you have to find people who are willing to do that and who have the right mindset and who could at least have the right model for any type of function. So I would ask people, if you were to start a business today, what would it be? That would be an interview question that actually that I would use to produce some pretty good people if they had thought about it. It didn't have to be good. I would say, what is the worst idea you've had to start a business? At least I know that they've thought about it, and it's something that they've considered in the past, so they have that right attitude. And then when it comes to the actual people themselves, kind of looking back, I've had some great people and some not so great people, and the one thing that I'm trying to do a better job of now that I wish I had done at the very beginning is be a little bit quicker to reward the superstars and a little bit quicker to let go of the laggards. So, if you think about that one person who's sort of dragging and, you're not sure, well, maybe if we tried this a little bit different, or maybe I can train them the right way or whatever it might be, just that one extra month that person stays on the team, if you were to transfer that salary to one of the higher performers, you're going to end up getting better results, because what ends up happening is you'll have these great employees or teammates, and then they're not, if you're lucky, they'll ask for a raise. The worst thing that can happen is when they just call you up for a call and say, hey, I got an offer somewhere. So back to the drawing board, and you have to go through the whole process and find 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 who's actually a star. So I'm trying to do a better job now of quickly rewarding the best employees I have in some way.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what Dan just mentioned. It's hard to recruit great talent because you're not looking just for good talent. It needs to be great. It needs to be an extension of you. And sometimes we're all humans and we're like, oh, that person is not very good, but okay, I'm going to try a couple extra months. At the end of the day, you're not doing themselves a favor or yourself. And it's always good to have everybody be in the best team as possible. So I've learned from my first startup, we just used to hire people based on resume. That's a big mistake because maybe you're very good and you went to Harvard or you worked at McKinsey, and that proves that you're smart, but it doesn't mean that you're right for an entrepreneurial journey. And at the end of the day, you as a founder want to hire people that have an entrepreneurial spirit. And if they eventually become a founder, that means that you've done an amazing job, because that's like the most rewarding thing. If you go to your next startup and you launch another startup and they want to follow you, that's good, because they enjoy working with you. They enjoy the challenge and they know that you're passionate and all that. So in my case, now I don't focus too much on that. Of course, if you have that and you have other intangibles, what I call, that's great. So for me, most people will focus on skill and know-how. So if you have experience in that industry, look, most industries are not rocket science. Unless you're trying to cure cancer or send rocket ships to space, everything else you can learn very fast. So the most important, and I always say, like, it's like a mathematical equation. It's knowledge plus skill. But the third variable is times, which is attitude. That's the most important. And for me, that's 50-60% of the equation. If I see that you're passionate, that you're going to be persistent, resilient, you're basically a go-getter and you're hungry, I'm willing to give you a shot because I know that you're going to try your best. And I always say to my team, the fact that we're number 1 today doesn't mean that we're going to be number 2 tomorrow. So we need to continue to innovate. And if you come here with a problem, come with potential 5 solutions and tell me which one of those 5 you want. Because I can give you 1,000 problems. Now you're not making my life easier or your life easier. So to scale, you need to have the right team from day 1, but also as you grow in time.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's also interesting to see how founders scale into CEOs and scale into heads of boards and things. Really great kind of growth transition. Dan, would love to appreciate kind of, as you've thought about scaling nationwide, any learnings that you've had, either kind of just as you've expanded that geographical reach, and maybe what you did as a founder to kind of pick up those learnings faster as you went through it.
Yeah, well, I was speaking to someone earlier. One of the best takeaways from my experience here at Babson was the just start approach, right? So just go out there and just start. And that's basically what I did with this. So when I started the company, I didn't know a single thing about drones, like literally nothing. I understood the business opportunity. I understand business and entrepreneurship. So I saw the opportunity there. It was right when the FAA was changing the regulations. Whereas in the past, you'd have to go through a lengthy process, apply 3 to 6 months, hire an attorney, So you could fly drones for commercial purposes. They had announced that they were now going to offer a situation where you just pass a test, get a license, and you're good to go. That was coming. That's when I decided to start the company with sort of more of an Uber type model, although it's different because that's commoditized, but that's a different conversation. But so I did actually start it out nationwide. You know, incidentally, my first customer was in Massachusetts. He didn't even know. He still doesn't know to this day. He was my first customer. But his project was in Waco, Texas.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I presented it. I built the website, did all this. Oh, yeah, we serve Texas. We serve everywhere. Sure. So got a lead and, you know, followed up and sold them the project. And it was in Waco, Texas. So, okay, now I had to scramble. I had to find someone in Waco, Texas who could help carry out the project. And that I did. And, you know, again, it's one of those things with scaling. It just takes time. Our network has grown. We have a pilot network. There are about 15,000 people, mostly in the US, but wherever around the world too. And you just kind of learn with them, just like you would with internal employees, who's good, who's not, who's maybe talented, but more of a diva, who's a hard worker, who can communicate, and who doesn't. And then we have, you know, we have data on that we use Salesforce. We have a map that plots everybody, and you can mouse over and kind of pull up some of these different characteristics and things that we identify. But again, a lot of that's just really trial and error. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't go so well. And then you just kind of have to, as you find better ones and you just learn the area, you learn the territory a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. Same with me. Like when I started e-commerce, I had no idea. I bought some stuff online. I sold a couple things on eBay. So the first thing I did is kind of like what a student would do is there's a lot of information out there. You have case studies from Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, Mercado Libre in Latin America. You have 10K, the annual reports that they're obliged to publish. You subscribe to all the newsletters from that particular industry, and you try to become the authority in that industry so that when you meet investors, when you meet clients, they will be impressed. And if they're impressed, they're more likely going to say, okay, I'll work with you. And then just talk to potential customers. They will give you what they need. Because in our case, for example, if we had replicated exactly the Amazon business model in America, it would have failed tremendously. Because it's not the same. All markets are different. Some states are even different, you know, within the US. So try to learn as much as possible from customers. What are the pain points? What would they want to see? And especially, what would they want to pay for? Because they might want to see, I want to see this and this, but maybe they don't want to pay for it, and that's not good as well. You know? So I think it's important to have that touch. No matter how big you are, you still need to find a way to keep in touch with not only existing customers so that they stay with you forever, but also new customers.
Yeah, I mean, I asked about customer discovery from pre-seed to Series A before I even ask about kind of revenue numbers. I love that. Fernando, I'd love to appreciate you kind of, we touched on this a little bit on terms of, you know, more money, more problems kind of attitude, but curious as you work with different companies that you've been with, like how have you balanced raising capital, scaling, hiring people, and finding that optimal number to raise that can both fuel that growth, but not break the company?
Yeah, it's a great question because most people think that you have money, you solve most of your problems. No, not necessarily. And again, as soon as you raise $1, you need to report to somebody, which is the board. And that board can either help you or not help you. So at the end of the day, when you raise money, it's a two-way street. Most people think like he's doing you a favor, she's doing you a favor. No, at the end of the day, they will be partners with you and your business. So I've had the experience where we had a lot of money and investors were a little more passive, which is great. But others that want to be a little bit more involved. And sometimes as you keep growing, especially if you're not profitable, you will need to raise another round. And you need to make sure that whoever you bring on board is not only 100% aligned with your vision, your passion and everything, but they're going to accompany you as far as they can. And sometimes they'll just put a pre-seed check or a seed check. And when you're raising your A and you're running out of money or runway, you need a bridge. Otherwise, you stop scaling. And sometimes that's when you really know the character of somebody. Not when everything is flourishing and you're scaling super nicely with the good economics, but when you're in like that, okay, I only have like 3 months of runway in my current investor, at least 1 or 2 give me a bridge so that I have another 3 or 6 months to build my Series A, you know? So it's important that they bring as much value as possible. And for me, it's basically potential talent that they could bring on board. And if you've seen the Uber Super Pumped, the series of 6, 7 series, they brought the CFO. I don't think he was great, but that's a different story. But if they help you bring talent, that's awesome. If they help you, of course, capital, but also network to other investors, that's great. If they'll help you get new clients, customers, if they'll help you expand to new markets. So they should be an extension, like another co-founder. Not only accept their money, and that's when you talk about like smart money. Really smart money is everything I've just mentioned, like, because at the end of the day, money is a commodity. Anybody can give you money. But you'd rather have somebody that gives you money and a lot of more like that network effect that we all speak about. So,
yeah, I often think fundraising is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Like both the VCs are picking you and you're picking your VCs for 10, these days, 15 years, depending on how long things stay private. Dan, would love to learn a little bit more. And I think you mentioned it on knowing when to hire and fire. Any like kind of tactical advice to first-time founders who maybe are having that first difficult conversation when they realize I have to let this person go?
Before COVID, we had a small office and we were working out of that. We transitioned to a remote work environment, just like everybody else did at the time, and began to hire people who were from all over the place. So people were working remotely. They didn't have to be in Massachusetts. So, okay, some people moved. So that suddenly we were left with the situation where everyone was working remotely, which makes it even more difficult to keep an eye on, keep track of what everyone's doing. With certain activities, sales, easy. Others that, you don't want to intrusive out. You kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, well, something, it must be, so they weren't doing it. You find that out later. Unfortunately, there's some people I've given the benefit of the doubt to where, eventually go log into their email and it's crickets. It's like, oh my God, can't believe this was, I put up with this for as long as I did. But, I think it's just a matter of staying in touch. It's working with them closely, making sure that they have goals and targets, and even on a daily or weekly basis that you're monitoring. And it can be difficult again when it comes back to what I was saying earlier, where you have a small company and everybody's doing a little bit of everything. Sometimes those metrics are a little bit harder to track and to tie somebody to a very specific one. But the more compartmentalized you can make it, the better, because then it'll just give you better idea of how they're doing. And then that makes it easy. I mean, this is what you should be doing. You're not doing it. I think, we'd all be better off if we were going different directions.
Nice. And Fernando, be curious how you've seen culture change in the kind of less than 20, less than 100, more than 400 people companies that you've been a part of. And as a leader, kind of what were some of the maybe more cultural initiatives or things that you did where you're like, wow, every time I have to start a company, I want to make sure I do this because it's been really efficient or really great?
Yeah, I think culture is probably one of the hardest things to build. because it starts with the founders, but it's really all management team as well, because each one is going to manage a separate team. And the first time, really didn't pay much attention to culture. And given that we were part of Venture Studio, the culture was actually not great because, in fact, we were in soft launch. We were 10 people. And the Venture Studio, which is the majority shareholders, basically said, how many people have you fired? What? It's been only like 4 weeks. This week, you need to fire 20%. Like, what? Why? It's just sending a signal that everybody needs to give 200% all the time. I personally don't like that MO, but on my next startup, I went the other way, which is not good either. So I knew somebody wasn't adding much value after a couple of months, and I decided to keep that person for 10 months. So that's not good either. And we're burning unnecessary cash, And it's good to have a fluid communication, talk to that person. And if that person doesn't react, then they're letting themselves go themselves, You're not firing them. So I think there's a good middle ground. I don't think it's good to fire just so that people are afraid of you. Lead by fear is the worst, I think. And also not keep somebody just because you feel bad about it. Like at the end of the day, it will hurt you because you're going to grow much slower than you should. And if it's not remote, but it's in person, that's even worse. Because one time, my co-founder CTO hired a guy who he said, this guy is brilliant. But the guy will show up 11:30. After 30 minutes, he will go for lunch for an hour and a half, work for another couple hours, and then leave. So most people would ask, Fernando, is this guy part-time? No, he was full-time. So that creates a horrible culture as well, because then everybody think, oh, this is so relaxed. I'm just going to cash in my monthly paycheck and not work as much, So you need to fine tune it. And at the end, it's not like being like the Google of everything is free and it's humanities, but and also not being ruthless. I think there's a middle ground. And at the end of the day, you need to, and that's why it's hard to both recruit and retain. You need to find somebody that believes in you and it's passionate about it, and it's going to be there in the good and in the bad.
Yeah, that's great. And we did on our prep call, we talked about that element of hiring the varsity athlete.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely hard to find, but once you do, you gotta keep them.
Yeah, and just to add, for example, I started recruiting straight out of college because that way, and I know if they were hungry and they wanted to learn, they were cheap labor, but at the same time very hungry. So it's the best combination. And some of them, I even recruit them when they still had a year and a half to go in college. But those were my best people that we formed, and they stayed with me for over a decade.
Yeah, that's great. For both of you, especially, once you graduated and were off campus, curious some of the ways that you've kind of stayed in that student mentality and different ways you've continued learning. Is it, you prefer to part of any professional clubs? Are you a big, are there any big books that you feel have really had an impact on you? Do you listen to a specific podcast? I think a handful of us are getting ready to graduate and are going to be missing kind of the weekly classroom time. What elements have you embraced to continue learning and having a little bit of a personal growth mentality?
I mean, so yeah, I'm more of a book reader than anything else. Never been a big podcast person as popular as they are, but that's what I would say. I mean, really, kind of going back to my point, the whole drone thing. I mean, I had to learn that. You just have to take that same approach and to whatever it is, study it and learn it, and don't be afraid of a different subject. There are a lot of things that some people might find intimidating, but if you're a Babson, you're perfectly capable of learning anything. So you could pick up that subject matter and, at least maybe having come here, maybe you're aware of that. You could, you have the ability to go there and start from scratch, and you could learn anything, any of these different topics, and pick them up and excel, or at least get enough background to know what you need to know or what, you know, or know what you don't know. In addition to that.
Yeah, I try to be a student my whole life because I think you never stop learning, and especially now that everything evolves even faster than like even 5 years ago. So I don't read that many books, but I love reading business cases. So as much as I can, and given that sometimes I do, I'm a teacher like remotely, I have access to like the HBS case studies. So I try to read as much as possible, and I enjoy it because at the end of the day, you learn, even if it's a different industry, you learn several things, and it's like learning a little bit from each thing that you read or that you talk to. Now I'm in a couple of WhatsApp groups, one related to AI, and sometimes they go so fast that I'm like, all right, to your question, like, how do you keep up? I don't know, because I'm even in a WhatsApp where they are telling me what to follow. And luckily, whatever Jeff said, I have heard of all the companies. I've used ChatGPT, I've used Perplexity, Cursor, and so forth, but there's a new thing coming up every month, you know, or sometimes even every week. So I think you can't stop. And when you look for talent, you need to find that intellectual curiosity. Like if they're not intellectual curiosity, then even if they're passionate, they're hungry, they're missing something essential because you never stop learning in life. And I think it's crucial to whatever you do.
It's great. I love that you love reading our cases. I can send you some of my homework. Just kidding. I do all my own reading. Well, would love to open up to the audience some questions. I know we've talked a lot about scaling team in terms of people, but I know there's also a little bit of background on scaling in terms of revenue. So we will open it on up. Right. And if you could stand up and state your name and kind of where you are in the Babson program or just a friend of the university.
No, we're not. Hi, thank you for your speech. And my name is Lauren from I'm a CEO program, and you have mentioned about the entrepreneur spirit for for the whole team. And I mean, here's the question: is it's really hard to find a employee who have the the entrepreneurship spirit. So it can be trained after you hire them, or if it's the case, like, have you ever experienced that? Like, what's the method you train your employee for a entrepreneurship experience?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's very difficult for everybody to have that entrepreneurial spirit. But at least the people that are like your C-level should have that characteristic. And I think everything can be taught. And I think that's what I love about building that kind of culture, to instill that kind of entrepreneurial spirit so that they, at the end of the day, like, for example, when I started in banking, I actually wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I was too afraid. 30 years ago, being an entrepreneur wasn't that common. And most people said, if you would tell them, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, oh, he didn't get a job, you know, like they wouldn't think it's cool. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, everybody's like, oh, that's so cool, you know, like, but 30 years ago, it wasn't like that. But in my heart, I really wanted. And I think the first thing is that I actually thought that I had to have some idea that nobody had thought about it. And that's why I probably didn't become, not only because I was afraid, but also because I'm like, oh, everything's invented. And at the end of the day, you don't need to invent stuff. Most people are innovators. They take something that already exists and makes it better. And we're just talking about it with Google, for example. Google wasn't the first one or the second or the third or the fourth. They were the eighth. But they did a better product and they kept improving. They're constantly innovating in different now verticals. And that's how it starts. You know, you pick something up and you just make it better. And when you think about value proposition, and this applies also to the team, you also need to think about your value proposition day one, but how you enhance it over time so that you stay relevant and your product and whatever your service, it's sticky, you know? So this is all what you need as a co-founder. Teach the people that work with you. And I love not having like an office. I love open space. And I always tell, it doesn't matter if you're an intern or you're like the COO, doors are open, and I always eat in front of my desk. Well, not now because I work remote, but and I would love to talk to people, because I think it's part of like the culture of giving back, and that's why I like teaching or participating in events like this one. I think it's important because I think the world would be a better place if you can share some of that knowledge.
And you can learn more about entrepreneurship as well at Babson. Guys, you don't just have to be a founder to be entrepreneurial. You can be entrepreneurial within companies.
Thank you for being here. My name is Alejandro. I'm a graduate student here, part of the MSCL program. My question has to do with the early stages in terms of hiring. What perhaps are some of the questions or the framework that you use to measure buy-in, especially when bringing in a new team member?
Well, I mean, what do we do is the first one. You want to ask a lot of research. What would you do in this scenario? And you can find out, how much, how deep they've gone into thinking about it before even applying. And it's not just something where they're on LinkedIn, just check, send my resume to everybody. I really think that's the best way to do it. Just find out, like, I mean, how much have they thought about it? Like, how seriously have they considered it? What other companies are you looking at? Is it, are they similar? Are there any similarities, or is it just they're trying to find whatever the first job they can get? I think that's.
I hope all of you woke up right now.
Yes.
Yeah, good chat.
So I would just add that I try to ask questions about my business. So if the person I'm interviewing hasn't even looked at my website, my LinkedIn, read about a little bit about the industry, that means that they have zero interest. You're one more in their list of like looking for jobs. So I would ask, oh, what do you think about this that I'm doing? Or from what your research, what are we doing good and what are we areas of improvement? And that way you see how much initiative they have. And at the end of the day, that's kind of, it's a gut feeling. There's no science, there's a little bit of framework, but at the end of the day, with time, you're going to learn more or less. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, because there are some people that are very good at interviews. And there are also people that are very bad, and they could be very good talent. So the interview itself is not always the thing. And for example, my experience with venture studios, this rocket internet Berlin based, they will look at your resume, and based on if you had like McKinsey or Bain, BCG or investment banking or Procter & Gamble and gone to a good business school, the interview would last 30 minutes and you would have 2 of those. And then they would test you on the ground. And if you didn't perform, in a month or 2, you were out. And it didn't matter whether you were the COO and intern or the co-founder. So for example, in Lino, Mexico, 6 co-founders started, and after 6 months, only 2 remained. People were fired like right and left because they were smart, no doubt about it. But they weren't right for that environment, especially in Latin America where nothing really works. The infrastructure is not there, so you need to be doubly creative.
All right, Mike's up here.
Thank you. I am a undergrad senior at Babson. Thank you for coming both. My question is about the future. So I've heard one of you guys mention like perplexity and a lot of like advices on like things that have worked in the past. But as founders, it's always hard because you kind of have to learning as we go and as we speak. So I kind of want to pick your brain on the future in terms of companies that are smaller, companies where social media, it's probably the main thing that pushes the CAC down. What do you think it's going to happen and how is it going to be different, and how founders should approach this new system? And when I say new, I really mean like the last 2 years of innovation in different media and technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating, and kind of to a point I made earlier is being unafraid of learning new things. And this is specifically what I'm talking about with regards to AI and everything else. I'm beginning to kind of really dive deep to think the same questions that I have. I mean, what is going to happen? Obviously, nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but the better understanding I have of the direction, at least, or being able to stay in front, stay on top, 2 steps ahead of everybody else, the better off I'll be. But I can say, just very recently, with my company, one change that some of the LLMs and AI tools have enabled is I've been able to source more from the Philippines, for instance. So it helps bridge that gap where they weren't there in certain areas, the things that I wanted to do. But now that if they're able to use some of these tools, then all of a sudden, it can be you can have a pretty solid contributor for a month. It states so imagine there that could, I mean, just what I've but yeah, it really fast, crazy. Uh, what's going to happen? Or people are going to lean more on ChatGPT or Grok or whatever it might be. Um, it's moving quickly, so uh, it's going to uproot a lot of things, just with the way people do business. So I think the faster you can get on top of that and be with the program, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of not just the tools, the new tools that are coming to market and that we've seen in the last months and years. I think it's important to have a view of the whole globe because, for example, the largest digital bank is not in the US or Europe, it's in Brazil. It's a new bank. And what they've done is amazing. Some stuff that happened in China, especially like 15 years ago, amazing. Like really like innovation comes from so many parts. So you start combining things that you're seeing in other markets with the new tools that we have. I think that's when opportunities come to that nobody would ever think, especially I think in the US, because the US is very focused on just the US. So as a founder, if you bring the perspective from the US plus other markets with these new tools, I think the sky is the limit.
Great. And last question, we have Mike over here.
Hi, my name is Talia White. I'm part of cohort 6 in Babson's Be Well program. So my question is about Elon Musk being a special employee with the government and him bringing his the mass firings that are going on in the federal government. And did you have any thoughts on should hiring and firing should the federal government be doing the same hiring that goes on in startups and in the private sector, like Elon Musk is trying to do?
Who knew we were going to get so spicy to close it out? Wow, I like it. Okay.
Well, I would say, I mean, without having specific, information on any of the roles or any of the people that are being let go, I mean, I do think in the public sector, it's unusual, so it's unexpected, but I think this is kind of day to day. And for a lot of businesses, and I know that he's done that where when he took over Twitter, for instance, and fired 80% of the staff, everybody was kind of sending out emails. Here's my Mastodon profile. It's going down, and it worked out. I mean, I think kind of like what I was saying earlier. I mean, I think it's probably better to be a little bit more aggressive on some of these things, and particularly there, where it's very rare and it's very people have it's a sort of a job for life mentality. Maybe it is a good thing. I think.
Oh yeah, no, that was
Uh,
appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings and views. I think efficiencies are always good, whether it's the public or the private sector. So in theory, it sounds like it's a good initiative. I don't think the implementation or execution is well done. And I know this from firsthand. For example, somebody works in the US State Department. The person in charge of assessing is a guy who's 19-year-old. His nickname on social media, I'm not going to say because it's not cool. Big something. And he asks the person in US State Department, what states do you work with? So this person doesn't even know what the US State Department does. And he's in charge of us, regardless of the age, because you can be super smart at 19, but so I think first you need to know what they do. And then not just say, oh, I'm going to fire everybody in this division or in this institution. Like, I'm sure that institution has a lot of fat and a lot of efficiency can be like well implemented, but I don't think it's done. And right now, it seems that they're doing it just for the big picture and the news. And they say, oh, I saved $5 billion. Right. Let's ask him how many people in the Pentagon has he fired. That affects his personal business. So he's not touching that way. My brother, doctor from Johns Hopkins, 24 years. He just recently, 9 months ago, moved to University of Miami. He does a lot of R&D research. That has been frozen. So the US is going to lose competitive. And who do you think is going to be in the front seat of that? China. And I'm sure Elon Musk and Trump don't really like China to be at the forefront. So I don't think they're really thinking. They're thinking maybe like what looks good in the next 6, 12 months, 18 months, or maybe 4 years. So I actually think, I hope it doesn't backfire, but I don't think the implementation, the initiative, the theory sounds awesome, but the implementation, I don't think is well done. Every company, private or public, depends on R&D to make progress.
I do think it's a good reminder that scaling is hard. And even if you're hundreds of years old as a country, you're not done scaling and you're still going to face those challenges that you talk about when you're hiring that first person to double your team count, or if you're kind of scaling an entire workforce of a country. So last thought, and then we have some gifts from you for Babson, and we'll wrap it up.
Sure. Well, what I was going to say to that is in kind of relating it back to scaling. One thing it makes me think of is I believe it's called the endowment fallacy. I think it was Daniel Kahneman or someone who sort of coined that term where, and we actually did this when I was here in Babson, where, okay, will you buy this mug from me for $5? No, I wouldn't do that. Well, I'll give you the mug. And then will you sell it to me for $5? No, I won't do that either. It's kind of the same thing where once you have something, you are less inclined to give it away, even for the same price. It's irrational. And, as far as, even with my company, that can mean software tools or people or whatever it might be that, okay, well, I rely on this. I really need it. And then you get rid of it. And then you realize, well, maybe I didn't really need it that much. Or you find another way when you're put in that situation. So there could be some of that there, just kind of tying it back to scaling and running a business.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you both so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We have some Babson swag for you.
Nice. Well, thank you very much.